Okay, so I'm going to be doing a commentary for a 26 court Tyrannical that I did last week. Obviously, same group as I've been doing it with. Prep Pal, this Priest, Warrior, and Pharaoh Druid, and then obviously me as a Frost Mage. These are the talents that I used for this. So for court, I always end up taking DB. I'm one of our assigned interrupts for the Imps. It's also kind of just a good stopper for any of the frontals, especially on the Dox pull. But typically the main purpose I'm just dragging DB is for the impulse, because I'm designated 2 of the stops for the Imps. Other than that, for court, even on fortified or tyrannical weeks, I always run this build for the Spectre. I'm always running full, basically single target. Basically, it's just considered the tyrannical build. Slick Ice, I'm running Wintertide, and then Splintering Cold. There's no changes that you make over here. The only thing in the general tree that you typically want to make sure you have for court is the Spell Steal. You can Spell Steal the Fortification that the guards cast. And other than Spell Steal, you want to make sure you have Energized Barrier. You can use Energized Barrier to take off the snare from the Witches in the second area after the first boss, and then you can also use it. The main one that you want to use it for is Arcane Lockdown. The mechanic that the first boss uses that requires you to jump up and down. You can actually use your barrier to interrupt, or to drop that stack off of you. Alright. Of course, it's going to be some good old glorious AFKing for, 50 seconds while we go on our little boat, our fantastic RP. Because this makes a lot of sense to having a timed key setting. Yeah, we gotta love RP. We gotta love boat RP. But yeah, I really enjoy the key actually starting, 53 seconds into the key. Same thing with Noku with the flying one, but that's not as bad because that's the key's like made around that. But now, this first mob, you normally, obviously, if you have a DH or a rogue or something that can like stop this mob and make it so you're not in combat with it, you use that. We don't have a DH for Imprison or a rogue for sap or anything, so you can poly invis it. So in order to do that, you need to poly it, and then you need to be the first one to get into melee range of it, or get into combat with it. As you saw, it dropped it put me in combat. And then what you have to do afterwards is you have to wait till everybody passes it. And then you can invis. So everyone's past it now, and you'll see I'll invis, or I should invis. Hopefully, maybe not. Question mark. I didn't invis. Okay, well I already messed up. Maybe that's why that mob came up. Smile. Yep, that is why that mob came up. So we don't worry about that. Normally, lovely making mistakes that I see now in a VOD that I go back and look at, but you can invis and you drop combat and that mob won't be pulled to you. So, glorious. Of course, it was completely planned. It was just for me to be able to spell steal 2 fortifications. But now that you see, the guard actually did fortification. I have a mouse over macro for spell steal. You see it in my recently casted spells. And I have the fortification buff up here. It basically increases your haste by 25% and decreases is a damage reduction by 25%. So very beneficial for you to spell steal that. You can tell your group not to spell steal that, but sometimes your group kind of, Prop Pally sometimes interrupts it, or your other DPS sometimes forget, or in my case with my Feral Druid, they interrupted on purpose to grief me, but... Other than that, your main kicks, you really only need to get the kicks on the construct. If the construct is alone and single target, you don't need to kick charging station. You only need to kick suppress. because it actually doesn't heal anything in single target. So you see here, both mobs actually got fortification off, and I actually spell stole both of them. Fortification is one of the buffs that do stack. There are a few buffs that don't stack, but fortification is one of them that do. Same thing with Arcane Fury and Azure Vault; those buffs stack. So if you can try and spell steal as much as possible. But as you can see now, I'm relatively low on mana. I can only spell steal one more time, but yeah. And now when you're into AoE, obviously your simple AoE rotation as normal. You're going your Orb into Blizzard, into Ice Nova when possible, as long as it's mass AoE. I'm also doing, for us, I am polymorphing the Guard, the Sentry ad that pats. We have nothing that can actually like pull something into a group, a DK or anything like that. So we actually just polymorph it or CC it. We can either root it or poly it, whatever works. Just make sure that it stays out of combat. Well, obviously we'll bring it in later in the pull, but now at the start of this pull, we don't really want to worry about the Sentry padding. So. Again, here as single target, I'm full targeting the construct. Yeah, for some reason, every key that I get into people are everyone's just interrupting my fortifications. So, yeah, that's lovely. And now, especially, it's not as big of a deal on Tyrannical weeks, but typically we want to be focusing the Mana Sabers if possible. Their bleed is pretty hard. It hurts a lot, especially when it's raging. It's not as big of a deal on Tyrannical raging. But if you can, focus the Mana Sabers. We have a Vortex down for when they jump, so the jump actually doesn't do anything, but... Again, you see him spell stealing the Fortification, and now we're going to chain this into the next pack. We are saving, our group is saving Lust for first boss on Tyrannica Week. There are times you can actually get 3 Lusts out of this dungeon, but we're typically not doing that on Tyrannica Week just because the second boss is the biggest, I guess, wall in this key. On Fortified Weeks, we typically Lust on pull, because you can actually get 3 Lusts if you Lust on pull, depending on your timing. But at least for us, on Tyrannica Weeks, we've decided that we're going to Lust first boss and second boss. The third boss isn't really a challenge anymore, so... Obviously, 2 target now, sending you Blizzard, and then I'm still full single targeting the construct. While we're doing this, our healer is going and hitting all of the pillars to make sure we don't get any ads during the boss. If you are a group that wants to do it, you can actually leave the pillar at the very start of the key, as long as you get all the rest of the pillars. If you do that, if you're a mage or anyone else, you can actually CC the ad that's coming. We don't do that, so I don't have to worry about that. But so our group is also pulling mobs into the boss. This is also another part of the reason why we wanted to Lust first boss. Obviously, the first boss, mechanics-wise, is kind of a joke, so he's not too big of a deal to actually deal with. So we range anywhere from pulling 1 to 3 packs into the boss. Obviously, not at the same time. We're chaining them. It's also very good for me as a Frost Mage to be able to funnel off of them. But we always pull this backpack that has the guard as well as all the whelps. And our Arcane Lockdown, I actually don't really have to take Energized Barrier for us. Priest can Mass Dispel it. But it's obviously a good safety to have it if the Priest can't Mass Dispel or your Priest dies for some reason. And obviously having this guard in this pack for the boss is also very good for me because I can now spell steal the Fortification. So now you see I had spell stolen the fortification. The only things you need to be aware of if you do pull these mobs in is the quelling strikes. Sometimes I'm not really too worried about the fortification, just because I don't want to die to any other mechanics, but as you see, I did take it that time. But I don't actually remember if we ended up pulling another pack into it. Okay, yeah, we did. The other pack that we sometimes pull into it is there's a pack on the left-hand side. It's an elemental and another person. I don't really like that as much as the other ones. The pack that we did pull it's an arcanist and a guard. The guards are the one that cast fortification, so if you can pull one of those in for funnel, I would recommend it. Otherwise, you obviously don't need it. But also, I would highly recommend trying to be somewhat near melee, especially if you have a priest for mass dispelling. And you see me trying to spell steal fortification. The only things you need in this, when you pull your Arcanist in, is you need to make sure you're interrupting both Seal Magic and Nightfall Orb. So you see there, I actually wasn't sure if I was going to get the Master Spell, so I actually did cast my Barrier. I did end up getting Master Spell, but obviously, like I said, it's a very good thing to have as a safety. Again, spell stealing fortification. Obviously, the damage reduction doesn't really matter for these pulls. It shouldn't really matter in any of the pulls because there's no form of damage going out other than in the ad pulls with the Mana Sabers if they jump on you. But other than that, it's just full single target from here on out. Again, you see I basically was going to miss that Master Spell, so I cast a Barrier. I also have let my healer know at this point that if they need to miss somebody with a Barrier or with Master Spell, miss me because I have my own out. It's more important to get themselves and everybody else in it. But now it's just full single target now. And now after this boss, anybody in our group can actually do the skip. We do the skip where you skip the mob up on the stairs, the construct, and you start the RP in the second area. We have our priests doing it. Priests are able to do it. Mages are able to do it. Rogues are able to do it. Druids. Anyone that can really run past the mob and invis. So Night Elves can do it if they have some form of like leap to get past. Like our warrior could do it. He could leap past and shadow meld. But we have our healer do it. There's no real damage that goes out in the Dox pull because the plan for this is after this pull, while our priest is doing the skip, we all run to Dox and do the Dox pull. Kind of just a time save while we're waiting for the RP to happen. I also somewhat griefed. I decided not to mount for some reason. I don't know why. But I missed some part of this pack because of it, but we don't worry about it. For this pack, the only thing I really need to be aware of is the sentry that's padding. As the one person who has a form of like hard CC in the terms of polymorph, we're actually having me polymorph them and then bringing them in later in the pack. That's the only mob that really matters because they can pull other people. So you see me, I'm polying them. And then this pack is just you're going full single or full AoE. There's a lot of fortifications happening in this pack. I typically only worry about trying to maybe spell steal 1 or 2. I kind of find the haste being overbearing if you have too many of the fortifications, especially if you're in Lust. Obviously, I won't be at Lust at this time because I used my double Lust on the boss. But it's still not too big of a deal. Also, there's like 5 or 6 guards in this pack. I think there's actually 5. So I don't worry about it. I typically just pay attention to one guard. Either if I'm focusing the guard or a guard that I see that's out of the pack, and I'll spell steal that one. So you saw I'm focusing a guard currently, and I spell steal that fortification off of it. The only people that really matter in this pack are the elementals because they do the charge blast frontal. You can obviously interrupt those with DB or blast wave or whatever. And then the Arcanist, they have the Seal Magic. The same mob that we pulled into the boss, the Seal Magic and the Nightfall Orb, but that's the only things you really need to interrupt. And now we actually do need to kill the Sentry. The Sentry is part of the percent for our pull, so we typically pull it in near the end or while we're running. Luckily for me, it's actually good for me to get Icy Veins off another mob there. But now, as we're getting here, our plan is now we go into an Imps pull with CDs. So the Imps pull is basically, we all go in with CDs going into an Imps pull with having certain people having CCs. So our warriors basically sending all CDs on Imps. And then our first 2 stuns are me with Dragon's Breath into the second stun is going to be a Blast Wave. And then we have any of our other stuns. We have Vortex with Typhoon from our Druid. We have Shout from our Warrior. We have Blinding Light from our Paladin. We have Scream from our Healer. But our really only 2 ones that we have like fully dedicated are our My Blast Wave and Dragon's Breath. You saw I Dragon's Breath and a Blast Wave, and now it's going to be one of our other CCs, so Blinding Light. And now we're just full. They should be dead by this point. It's obviously a lot more important when it gets to fortified weeks because they last a lot longer. But you also kind of need to make sure you have Icy Veins going into those packs. Otherwise, you can't really get a spell off in between your Dragon's Breath and your Blast Wave, which kind of sucks. It kind of means you're just sitting there just waiting for those mobs to cast. I'm going to go back to show you what happens here. So the mobs that I was talking about earlier that the Energized Barrier talent is for in your general tree, the one that removes Arcane Lockdown as well, are these mobs, the diamond mobs that's casting Bewitch. They cast Bewitch on me, and it reduces both your movement speed and your haste. You see, I got the buff. I use Barrier, and it immediately dispels it. And that's because anything that reduces your movement speed is basically considered a snare in terms of Energized Barrier. So that's why Energized Barrier works to actually drop the Bewitched. It's not that big of a deal because our Priest can also dispel it. But obviously it's nice to have your own way of dispelling those if possible. And now, a lot of these pulls, especially in the mini-bosses, on Fortified weeks, on Tyrannical weeks, they're not really anything troublesome. So we're obviously pulling mobs into it. We also do it on Fortified weeks, just obviously for the time save. There's nothing really that detrimental in these packs, or at least on the mini-bosses, that could wipe you, other than the Scream of Pain obviously hurts, which needs to be, I guess, soothed in a Raging week. And obviously it's going to hurt a lot more on Fortified weeks, but... At this point, I had sent my personal lust in this pack. As I need it, the only time I really need my lust up is for the second boss, so as long as I can get my lust up for the time for boss, which I should, there's 4 minutes left in the cooldown, and I should be able to get it up in time. I don't really know what was occurring there, but yeah. We'll let that happen. I know he was getting the little orb, but that was a little questionable for that to be happening that long. But I remember what was happening here. So the reason we did this, well, not really the kiting. I'll explain this. So it is Raging Week, and even though it is tyrannical, this, as you saw, the Scream of Pain hurts a lot, which is just a thing that has a flat AOE, and you can't do anything to. Can't LOS it or anything. So we're actually calling it this time to stop damage on the mob, because as soon as it hits 30%, it's going to rage and do the Screaming Pain, and then we'll probably just get one shot. So at this point, we're calling to stop dam. So Screaming Pain happens, and then we're going to start dam again and DPSing it. And now it's just we need to bring it below 30% before the next thing. And now it's going to get soothed, and we'll be fine. Obviously, a little bit unfortunate for a class like me, where I have to actually be casting all the time to get value out of Icy Veins, but as you see, I'm not casting my Icy Veins again, just because I know that we're gonna have downtime here. So. And now again, it's going to be an impact. We typically always go into the impact when we run to the other side, so now this is going to be all of our CDs again. Running into, again, DB into Blast Wave with our Warrior setting all cooldowns. Again, I always like to have Icy Veins for all these packs. I typically open Icy Veins into Blizzard into Orb, and then I typically Ice Nova. Sometimes I don't have enough time between those casts to actually get DB off. So here it's a little unfortunate. I sometimes have to hold like a spell or two. So you see I actually only get, even in Icy Veins, I only got one cast off between having my casts. So I got Ice Nova off in between the Dragon's Breath and the Blast Wave. And then we obviously have Typhoon and Blinding Light after that. Now for these, you're just LOSing the Fel Dominations. The little puddles from the wolves do a little bit of damage, but they're not really detrimental. The only other detrimental thing in this pack is Searing Glare that happens, as well as Ice Storm. You just need either kicks or you need hard CCs on it. Dragon's Breath actually doesn't work to interrupt Eye of Storm, whereas Blast Wave does. So you see he's casting Ice Storm. I Dragon's Breath and it didn't work, and then I went into a Blast Wave. Not entirely positive why DB doesn't actually work to stop that cast, but you should just be using Blast Wave is one of the casts that does actually work to stop it, because it actually does move it. Again, I'm not popping another Icy Veins here. We obviously have an Enforcer coming here soon. Now this mob, the reason we're pulling it over here, it obviously doesn't matter because we found out the Enforcer is actually spawned over here. They're padding over here right now. Typically you want to be fighting these guys up on the ramp because if an Enforcer like spawns over here, you want to make sure you don't accidentally pull it into the mini boss. But and obviously here, I can't be sending Lust. We're saving Lust. I obviously still don't have it yet, but we're saving Lust for the boss itself. Unfortunately, I don't know why it always happens with our group. We always seem to get we never get good items. We always get items that make us fight 2 Enforcers, which is just incredibly bad for time. So all of our court runs are incredibly tight on time because we have to fight 2 Enforcers every single time. Like as of right now, this was enough. This is enough percent for us to actually just straight up go into the final boss because the last mob gives us enough percent for this. But obviously we still haven't killed the 3rd mini boss, so we can't do that yet. That's kind of what the route is based around. The route is based around having to only do 1 Enforcer. Obviously, we're not going to know how many mobs we have to kill until we get to the second area. So we can't really determine that until we actually kill the first boss, which we kind of pull the first area around only doing 1 Enforcer. All this trash in the second area is kind of just funnel. So there's not really anything that can be changed for that. Kind of shitty having something be so RNG based, but Again, for these enforcers, you just LOS it. There's a room here you can LOS it in. I was just LOSing it back here. I wasn't actually sure where we were LOSing it at, but these pulls are kind of really bad for me, just because it's, I mean, pure single target's obviously somewhat fine for me, but it's really unlucky in terms of Icy Veins, because I kind of have to send Icy Veins here on a single target, and I'm most likely not going to actually get the full cooldown back, which is just unfortunate because I actually need it for boss, but there's not really a whole lot for me to do on this guy, other than obviously just, you know, full single target. You can pull other mobs into this if you need. We did it obviously in the first mini boss. You can do it in the second boss as well. But all of the mini bosses kind of really don't do anything other than the second one, and then the first one obviously does the screeches, the screech of pain. But and now the second mini boss, or the second boss, is kind of, it's not bad for Frost Mage in terms of like offensive abilities. It's very, I still need to find ways to survive, especially on hierarchies, because I definitely struggle. But it's basically just the damage ramps over the whole fight with burning intensity. Typically what I like doing is I like trying to have at least a rune for every single time the imps are going to be up, a rune and an orb. Sometimes it doesn't really work out like that. Like typically the second one, I sometimes don't have it up because I Icy Veins on pull, and then I rune for this one, and it's kind of hard to get a rune up for the second one. Orb also sometimes doesn't line up, so I kind of need to figure out. I think that's something that I might talk with the group about trying to hold things. Like here, I actually held my orb because our warrior always calls they're going to send all their cooldowns for the first set. So I actually held my orb here, knowing that we're going to be missing some damage for the second set of ads. I didn't hold my rune, which I could have done, and now at this point I sent my mirror image because this will last 45 seconds, so I'm hoping that I'll actually have mirror images for a good majority of the fight. Unfortunately, this fight does take, I think it takes around like 2.5 minutes, so we're kind of struggling near the end of the fight in terms of defensives, because you really don't want to be using G-Invis at the start of the fight because the damage isn't that much. Obviously, the damage ramps with the burning intensity which they cast. But yeah, so now it's the second one, the second form of imps. Now I send orb into Blizzard, and now we also have the same interrupt order for these ads. These ads do scale with tyrannical, so that you do actually need your kicks for these, your interrupts. So we obviously have the first two interrupts. It should be my Dragon DB into a Blast Wave. Luckily, a Fireball did actually go off there. It actually went on our tank. If that Fireball goes on basically anyone but the tank, they will most likely get one shot because those Fireballs struck. But now you see at 3 stacks, it seems like, I think it's every like 3 seconds, we're taking basically, I'm taking 25% of my health, which is a large amount. And now you see what I was talking about earlier, how I like having an Orb and Rune of Power for every single ad spawn. Here I actually end up using my Lust. I wanted to save my Lust for this one because I knew I had Orb for the prior one, so I knew we had some form of damage, and now basically running into the second portion of the fight, I'm obviously not going to get another value of Lust, like another use of Lust. I'll get one more in this key basically, maybe 2 depending on our times, but I liked trying to save Orb in this case, or not Orb, I like trying to save that second Lust so that we have it. At least I have that increased damage for the next set. The way I also deal with these is I like trying to run off to the side. It might not be great if you have something like a Resto Sham or like an Evoker like that. I run off to the side because when I throw my orb, if I am running off back here or like with a group or whatever, my orb doesn't always get all of the imps. It's also unfortunate because I mean he places barrier, which I try running in, but obviously I'm losing value from my rune here. But and now you see I'm saving orb again. I alter timed this one. So the only issue, there are a few issues with the mage defenses for this fight. So alter time is really bad just because Infernal Eruption. It's really hard for you to actually time alter time in terms of not getting messed up with Infernal Eruption. Because you obviously need to be in the spot with the entire group when it's going off. So you see I alter timed back to get my health back, but now I need to run in for the Infernal Eruption, which I ended up obviously getting in there in time. But now you see I'm basically struggling in terms of health. I obviously already used my health pot, and now the only thing I really have left, I have Ice Blocks, and I have G-Invis, and the boss still has 9 million health left. As I said, it's kind of one of the worst fights, and at least personally, for defensives. I use G-Invis for this one. If you time G-Invis basically perfectly, you can basically get it so that it gets 2 uses off of the ticks from the boss. You basically just need to do it the second that the tick's gonna happen, which you can kind of game it. But now you see at 6 stacks, 7 stacks, which is only 230 in, the boss is hitting me for, let's see what the 6 stack does. I go from 60 to 20. It's 40% of my health every basically like 2 or 3 seconds. So it's a lot of healing going on in this fight. Definitely hurts a lot. Obviously, since at this point I did have Mirror Image coming back up, but it's very hard for us to use defensives because we can't really use Ice Block because then we're gonna get left behind in Infernal Eruption. We can obviously take our Ice Block healing talent, which might help some, but then if we're using that, we're obviously not doing damage that entire time. So it's kind of a little unfortunate. And now with our group, we do have a Prop Paladin. Obviously, it doesn't really matter if it's Prop Paladin or what kind of Paladin it is. Paladins have a transmog on their shield called Truth Guard. I believe it's their Legion Legendary or one of their class hall things. The transmog allows them to actually determine which pack the mob is in. So we knew it was in this pack, so we just the Paladin runs around and it basically like their shield will light up. Now this, I like to try and have my group stay in melee just because I actually get more cleave off of it. Well, the cleave I don't really care about, I get more prio target damage. So I'm basically trying to keep Blizzard up at all times for this. If possible. Just because I actually get the Orb CDR, and so I get the prio target damage. And now for the bats. The bats basically require a form of hard CC. It's really weird how some of the things actually stun them and some don't. So we have a decent amount of stuns. We have Stormbolts, we have Psychic Scream, we have the Druid Rake, we have Hodge. For mages, the only ones that actually work for us is you can poly them. Polying is a great safety spell that you can use for it. Otherwise, Dragon's Breath is basically the only one that works. Blast Wave doesn't actually work to interrupt the bats. I'm not really sure why, because that's like they're casting during it. So you saw our Druid raked this one. Unfortunately, it's not in melee, so I can't really get Blizzard value off of it. I try and get it here. For defensive wise on this guy, I typically try and alter time the Shadow Bolts if possible. You should have it for every other or every 2. We also, if the bats go on our warrior, we're actually leaving them. The warrior can spell reflect and hypnosis and actually just get like a massive shield. That's the thing you see on them right now. Obviously, you can't see how big the shield is, but supposedly it's a pretty massive shield. So he tells us that we can leave the hypnosis on him. And now I'm not using a second Icy Veins here because obviously I want it for the boss, and this mob's going to die relatively soon. You saw Dragon's Breath actually interrupted the bat. And now it's basically we're just going to go to the boss. There's a few things that I kind of want to talk about for the boss in terms of what I like to do. I've kind of tried gaming around with where I want to stand and the distance I need to stand from the group. I've tried being a little bit closer to melee and so that the melee don't have to run as far to keep as much uptime as possible. But kind of as we've gotten further into it, it kind of just seems like it's not really worth. It's not really worth trying to game it that much. It obviously might be worth later on in 27s, 28s when we're missing out for a few seconds in terms of damage. But at this time we have 5.5 minutes for a boss, and we're obviously fine on damage. One thing that I really enjoyed for this fight, I guess I didn't really go over it with my general talents because it's something that I almost always run. It's kind of personal preference. I always run Ice Flows. You can kind of get a lot of value from Ice Flows. I get a lot of value on the second boss because I can actually run while casting the entire time that Infernal Eruption is happening. Or in the first boss with all of the frontals that are going out, the Resonant Slashes or whatever. The biggest value from it is you actually get value on 2 different things on this boss in particular. Ice Flows you can obviously cast, as I'm the only range in our group other than our healer. We can obviously be casting the entire time that he's actually going to be charging at us for the Blade Surge. And the other thing is Blink removes all roots and stuns. So I can actually run over any of the tornadoes that spawn in the ground here. So you know how there'll be little like circles that, and if you run into them, they stun you. Blink actually removes the stuns. So that's something that I can do is I can actually run into them myself. So anything that's close to me, I actually end up just blinking into it and removing the stun circle itself, which is very beneficial because obviously it's something that I actually have to deal with pretty frequently. This is something I also like trying to do. If possible, don't put your rune in the spot that you're going to be baiting the things in. While the range does actually cover the entire thing, so when the Blade Surge happens, the range from rune actually goes all the way outside. The best thing I've found is trying to put your rune near the outside or like kind of halfway in between, because you obviously get full value when you're inside baiting, and then you're obviously going to get value when you're outside. But defensive-wise, I don't use any defenses for the first one. I typically just have a barrier going into the fight. That way I have the barrier kind of rolling for this first Slicing Maelstrom. So you see I still have 30 seconds left on it just because I shielded before the fight started. Other than that, there's not really much damage for this first one. I mirror image because I know the next Slicing Maelstrom is going to be in 20 seconds. So with mirror image lasting 45 seconds, I know it's going to last at least for the next one, and it'll last for a portion of the one after it. And again, you see I'm using Ice Flows. I'm able to cast the entire time while this is happening. You can, like I said, you can bait all of these in the exact same spot, which basically makes the lines, when he does the charging lines, his Piercing Gale line, it all goes in the same spot. Now for the second Slicing Maelstrom, I obviously have mirror image still rolling. The way that I do it is I use barrier and images for the second one. That's my typical defensive pattern for that. The only thing that's a little bit difficult on this particular boss is thundering. You really need to know the timings to know when you can actually clear, or like if you're going to have to clear. I'm the circle person here. I'm a positive charge, so I know that the next thing after Slicing Maelstrom is going to be a Blade Surge. So I basically know that I need to be clearing here because I need to get back in the corner to bait. If you're a negative, obviously you don't have to worry about it at all, but obviously here I tried baiting my rune a little bit to the left. That way when I get out of it, I'm still in my Rune of Power for this whole time. For the third one, we rallied. I typically like using Altar for this one. I Altar and my images have gone at this point. You can barrier if you want, but I typically just try and Altar. Altar allows you to survive the entire thing. And I'm back into the corner. It is kind of a bad way to try and be baiting the same spot with Storming. You can obviously try and eat the Stormings if possible, but And now for the fourth one, typically I either try using G-Invis or we use some other form of cooldown. I believe our healer said they were going to barrier this fourth one, so I actually didn't end up using G-Invis. I just used my own personal barrier. And then that means for this next one, I'm going to have G-Invis for it. G-Invis actually lasts the entire length of Slicing Maelstrom, so you can actually survive all the ticks of it with just G-Invis. Very good defensive for it. Would highly recommend doing it. And now you see what happened there? Our priest actually wasn't in melee range. Here, I'll go back to 10 seconds. Our priest was a little bit farther out of range than normal. Which caused the Blade Surge to be baited on him. Which kind of now makes it so that there's going to be 3 here and 1 here, because the max amount of shades that can be out at once are 4. And now knowing this, I kind of went to clear this this circle for me. I know that after this Blade Surge, there's going to be nothing else happening, except for a Slicing Maelstrom next, so I go to clear this. Obviously, I'm going to run into it, and I just face myself towards the wall, because I can just blink and remove the stun. This was the one that I used G-Invis for, so G-Invis lasts the entire time. As you see at 4 stacks, I did it a little early, so I actually didn't get the G-Invis value for the last one, but obviously in this entire rest of the phase, there's no form of damage going off, so he has 20 seconds to heal me back up to full. And obviously as a Disc Priest, he's going to be doing damage, and I have Atonement stacks on me, so it'll be perfectly fine. Now this is Slicing Maelstrom again. I had a big shield, so I didn't actually need to use a defense. I used Alter Time here. I didn't actually need it because our healer used one of his big cooldowns and gave us big power word shields for that barrier. So I actually didn't need to use it there, but obviously it never hurts to help your healer with defensives, but... And now here is going to be another Slicing Maelstrom. I blocked this one. Now I'm trying to avoid going back over to the one the stun circle. I'm probably going to do it here relatively soon to get rid of it. Again, facing myself just right towards the wall, I can just blink and immediately get out of it. And again, I have a positive thing here, so I know that I need to be the person that goes and clears. Into a Slicing Maelstrom. My defensive for this one, I barrier and image. Mage has enough defensives, at least especially on this boss now that it's been nerfed, that we have defensives for almost every single phase. Again, I just run into the thing that's anywhere near me. I kind of just need to make sure the area all around me is going to be clear, because I'm obviously the one doing all the baits. Now for this one, I Alter Time. Obviously, there's a little value that's going to be lost just because there are some times I don't have an Ice Flows, or there's other things that I need to deal with, but obviously I'm the one person baiting, I'm the one person that's going to be losing things, but obviously there's going to be times where a melee are out of range, and I'm still doing 70, 72k, 71k on that boss. Obviously fine. And we ended that key with 1:20 left for our 26 court. I did 97.6, our warrior did 97.5, and our druid did 92. One of the higher things I've done for court, I think I've only broken 100k 1 or 2 times for court. But yeah, the last boss I feel is very beneficial to be running Ice Flows on it, especially because you get value out of Ice Flows with baiting, and you get value out of Blink with being able to actually remove the stun circles. But yeah, that's the commentary for the 26 Tyrannical Court, and hope you guys enjoyed it.